For this instalment, I thought it would be fun to show you a little extract from one of the tunes on the Aristocrats album, which may or may not be out and available for purchase by the time you read and or watch this. It's from a tune called Bad Asteroid, and it's actually something that's been bubbling away in my collection of unused tunes for about 18, 19 years. And finally, I've got an excuse to record it properly. And yeah, it's called Bad Asteroid. Look up the Aristocrats if you want to know more about this. But the section I wanted to show you today, I thought you'd find interesting because there's some wacky tapping ideas, but also there's some harmonic interest. There's some budget Steely Dan kind of chords going on in the background. So if you just play the lick on its own, it doesn't mean anything. It sounds weird. You need the chords there for context. So I guess I'll start by showing you what the chords are. Okay, so here are the chords. Starts with that, so it's kind of a C triad, but you've got a B flat in the bass, so you might think of it as a B flat Lydian vibe, which ends up there. And there's an A with a B in the bass, so you might, or probably do, think of that as a B11th kind of sound. And that's kind of fun. Every finger moves up one fret apart from the one on the B string. And I guess now it's a nice dominant ninth in the key of C. And then something like that. It's essentially an F major 7. Sometimes I'll add that major 9 sound in there. So a lot of these feel like keyboard chords. So you've got a triad and then you've got the wrong bass note. So I guess it's a C with an F in the bass. And then this, A flat Steely Dan chord. Call it what you will. I seriously don't care what that chord is called. But it's that one. Going to G13. Make sure you're not playing the A string there, that will kill it. And then it's going to B flat major 7, a bit of a sharp 11 in there for flavouring. And then back to a nice moody E minor chord of some kind. So. The more attentive among you may have noticed that there's one note running through. And that seems like a good trick for making sure weird, random sounding chord progressions do kind of make sense. If there's just one pedal that runs throughout the whole thing, it sounds more like you intended to put the chords in that order, hopefully. want more. So you can either hop onto the B string and go up another 3 frets, or, which I like to do, go back to the top E string and back to where you were. So now you've got one shape working pretty hard for you. You've got every note between there and there. You're not repeating any, you're not skipping any. And it gets more fun when you start to complicate things and add some extra notes. So I might, for instance, want to have a minor 7th arpeggio, in which case I could maybe add the 7th there. Exactly the same idea, except this time this hand is doing a bit more work, kind of stretchy. You know, elbow down, wrist straight, thumb down. If you need the neck of the guitar up here by your nose, and so be it. All that matters is that it sounds good. So exactly the same principle, or I could do it for a major 7th arpeggio, or I could go for something like this. It's kind of an unusual arpeggio that you don't hear every day, but it's no harder for your hand to execute than the humble minor 7th arpeggio. For any of these, all you really need is the shape on one string, and then the shifting protocol is the same. So for B major 7th, so it's there, 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 and then the same thing here. It might be worth really focusing on the shift between the end of one string and the start of the next. Because the last thing in the world you want is, 2 notes ringing, or something like that. As soon as you kick on the distortion, it's an ungainly sound. It spoils the whole monophonic appeal of a lick like this. So you might even check that you're comfortable with that thing, where every time one finger goes down, the other one releases. I think the main thing that throws people when they're descending in pitch is this kind of assumption that you can do the hammer-on backwards. And like if hitting the string really hard gives you a note, then removing your finger really hard should give you another note, and it doesn't. I think when you're coming down, your tapping hand has to act like a pick. You can test that just by having all the fingers lined up and then tell yourself you want to hear the 10th fret on the E string and see if you can get a really loud, convincing note. I'm deliberately doing this with a clean sound, even though it's harder. You could even try different dynamics. You could try to check you can do it soft and do it loud. Then when you kick in all the distortion and the gain, generally the best policy is to hit these notes as hard as you can. They will still sound fluid because you're not picking them. But if you play too softly, then all the background noise, the handling noise, will devour the notes that you're trying to communicate to people. So the more confident you can make those notes sound, the more assertive the pull-offs are. The thing I get asked about quite a lot is, how do I use chromatic notes? How do I play outside? And I think one thing that's important to remember, you need to like the sound of chromatic playing and outside playing before you try and do it. You can't just do it because some other guy on the internet told you you're inadequate for not being able to do it. And the other thing to bear in mind is, if you know the blues scale, you've probably used some chromatic notes in the most musical way possible, without realizing that that's what you were doing. If you look at the minor pentatonic scale, and then you look at what we call the blues scale, which has this extra note, it's kind of the worst note in the world. If you land on that, you're hurting people. really, really jarring note. And yet most of us know blues licks where we can use it in context, so it's an ornament to add a certain funkiness to the fifth or indeed the fourth. It's not meant to be a melodic note in its own right, it's meant to add a certain feel to the more correct sounding notes that live either side of it. If you can do that, then in theory you know everything you need to know to use any one of the 12 notes at any point over any chord, so long as you use it responsibly. And I think the main things are to play it safe. If you follow every chromatic, jarring sounding note with another good note that's not too far away from it melodically, if you can just step up a semitone and magically you're playing a note that's in the chord, that suddenly justifies the shocking note you played a millisecond ago. And the other thing that makes you sound even more confident is if you can arrange the notes in such a way that the good note lands in a more important part of the beat. And these are things you can't be too conscious of these things when you play. But if you're listening to what you do, then trial and error, along with trying to feel responsible for the notes you play, should result in that same end product. The chromatic notes going where they're most welcome, and the more melodic notes falling in the stronger places within the pulse of the music. So there are a few ways you could approach this. You might look at the pentatonic scale and fill in the gaps. Or something like that makes sense because you've got all these chromatic notes in a row, but the highest one and the lowest one are right, so the listener will forgive any anomalies they hear in between. Or you could maybe go right back to first principles and say, I'm going to use the notes that are in the chord, and that will be my template. So, I don't know. And then look at where the chromatic approach notes live relative to that shape. And something like that, there are some horrendously wrong notes in there, but because they're jutted right up against a chord tone, you're immune from criticism up to a point. And that seems to be how that works, or my personal favourite. It's the idea of the chord tones being the skeleton, and then you flesh it out with chromatic approach notes. And when people talk about playing outside, I think that's the same thing, but you zoom out, you look at the same concept from further away. So instead of one wrong note leading up to a right note, it's a wrong key for a while leading into a right key. Same principles apply. If you can get lost but then somehow land on your feet without the melody jumping too far, and with the first nice note happening somewhere important within the pulse of the music, you sound cool rather than wrong. And I find it interesting that you can use every single one of the notes in the chromatic scale, and the listener will still know what chord you're implying. There must have been all 12 notes in there, but hopefully it sounds suitably like B minor rather than F major or something. It's where you put the notes, not what the notes are, that I think is the most important thing.